Did Jesus Christ really die on the cross? Or is everything we know about the crucifixion a grand deception? Today we'll be exploring a controversial premise that challenges 2,000 years of belief. This theory boldly claims that Jesus Christ did not die on the cross, but rather he survived. Now, before you dismiss this as just another conspiracy theory, consider this. What if the accepted narrative we've been told is missing some vital pieces? What if there's more to the story of the crucifixion than meets the eye? The swoon theory is not a new concept. It has been around for centuries, sparking heated debates among scholars, historians, and theologians. It's a theory that dares to question the mainstream interpretation of what happened on that fateful day in Jerusalem. Was Jesus' death a grand illusion? Did he merely swoon or faint, appearing to be dead, only to revive later in the coolness of the tomb? To answer these questions, we'll be examining the biblical verses and other canonical and non-canonical scriptures that proponents of the swoon theory use to support their claims. We'll also evaluate the historical accounts that seem to lend credence to this controversial theory. But we won't stop there. We'll also consider the counterarguments and criticisms of the swoon theory. We'll weigh the evidence on both sides, challenging our own beliefs and assumptions as we go. The swoon theory, a belief that has caused ripples in religious and historical circles. What is this theory? It's a hypothesis that suggests Jesus Christ, revered by billions as a divine figure, did not die on the cross as traditionally believed. Instead, the swoon theory proposes that he merely fainted from exhaustion and severe physical trauma, a state medically known as swoon. According to this theory, Jesus was later revived in the cool, quiet confines of the tomb. Proponents argue that his subsequent appearances to his disciples were not spiritual visitations, but evidence of his survival from the crucifixion. The swoon theory first emerged in the 18th century, its origins traced back to a German scholar, Karl Friedrich Barth. Barth, a controversial figure himself, suggested that Jesus had been secretly administered a drug on the cross that made him appear lifeless. This theory was later developed and expanded by others, including Heinrich Paulus and Friedrich Schleiermacher, who offered more nuanced arguments. Why is this theory considered controversial? Primarily because it challenges the core Christian belief in the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection is central to Christian faith, seen as the divine proof of Jesus' messiahship and his victory over death. The swoon theory, by suggesting that Jesus never died on the cross, undermines this foundational belief, causing a stir among theologians and believers. But this theory isn't just confined to religious circles. Historians and medical experts have also weighed in on the debate. Some point to the brutal nature of Roman crucifixion methods, arguing that survival would have been virtually impossible. Others focus on the lack of historical records supporting the theory's claims. But how credible is this theory? Let's explore the evidence. In the Gospel of John, there are verses that raise questions about the crucifixion. The Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 34, describes a particularly critical moment. Here is what it states. Instead, one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. This verse is pivotal to the swoon theory. The detail of blood and water flowing out when Jesus was pierced in the side is significant. In medical terms, this could imply that the heart was still pumping when the spear struck. The presence of water might suggest a buildup of fluid around the heart or lungs, a condition known as pleural or pericardial effusion, which can occur as a result of severe trauma or stress. This account contradicts the widely accepted belief that Jesus was already dead at the time of the piercing. The flow of blood and water could suggest that Jesus was, in fact, still alive. In the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verse 44, Pontius Pilate is surprised to hear that Jesus is already dead. The scripture reads, Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. Summoning the centurion, he asked him if Jesus had already died. Why was Pilate surprised? Could it be because crucifixions typically lasted much longer? Crucifixion was a slow and agonizing form of execution. Death could take days, not mere hours. Pilate's surprise suggests that Jesus' death was unusually quick, raising questions about whether he had truly died. Then there's the account of Jesus' burial in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verses 41 and 42. It describes how Jesus was laid in a new tomb in a garden near the site of his crucifixion. The scripture reads, At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. They laid Jesus there because of the Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby. The proximity of the tomb allowed for quick burial before the start of the Sabbath. But it also provided an opportunity for Jesus to be rescued and treated if he had indeed survived the crucifixion. These are but a few of the many instances within the Bible that seem to support the swoon theory. It's important to remember that Scripture can be interpreted in many different ways, and these interpretations have been the subject of debate for centuries. But the Bible isn't the only source that supports this theory. Non-canonical scriptures, often overlooked, also provide intriguing insight. One such non-canonical scripture that supports the swoon theory is the Gospel of Judas. This text, discovered in the mid-20th century, offers a radically different portrayal of Judas Iscariot, the disciple infamous for betraying Jesus. The Gospel of Judas suggests that Jesus asked Judas to betray him. According to this gospel, Jesus wanted to escape his physical body. This perspective turns the tables on the traditional narrative. Instead of being the villain, Judas becomes a complicit participant in Jesus' plan. This text implies that Jesus survived the crucifixion, aligning with the swoon theory's claim that Jesus did not die on the cross. The second treatise of the Great Seth, another text from the Nag Hammadi library, also provides a different angle. This scripture describes the crucifixion from Jesus' perspective, stating that he was laughing at their ignorance while they believed they were crucifying him. This scripture suggests that Jesus was not physically present on the cross, but it was merely a semblance. It aligns with the swoon theory, which holds that Jesus did not actually die on the cross, but survived. There's also the Gospel of Barnabas, a controversial text that outright supports the swoon theory. This gospel claims that Jesus was not crucified at all. Instead, it was Judas who was mistaken for Jesus and crucified in his place. These non-canonical scriptures present a stark contrast to the canonical Gospels. They challenge the traditional narrative of Jesus' death and resurrection, suggesting instead that Jesus survived the crucifixion. While these texts are often dismissed as heretical or fraudulent, they offer alternative perspectives that provoke thought and discussion. They remind us that history is often a matter of perspective, and there are always multiple sides to a story. Beyond Scripture, there's also historical evidence that raises doubts about Jesus' death on the cross. Let's journey back over 2,000 years to the time of Jesus Christ. History, as we know, is not just about facts, but also the interpretation of those facts. And in this case, the interpretation of the crucifixion and the events surrounding it is crucial. Roman crucifixions were harsh, to say the least. They were designed to be a slow, agonizing death. But could someone potentially survive it? Some medical experts suggest that it's not entirely out of the question. Consider this. The process of crucifixion primarily leads to death by asphyxiation. The victim, hanging by their arms, would have a hard time breathing. They would need to push up on their nailed feet to get a breath, leading to exhaustion and eventual suffocation. However, if the victim was taken down early enough, while still conscious, survival is theoretically possible, especially if they received immediate medical attention. Now let's look at the gospel accounts. They tell us Jesus was on the cross for only about 6 hours. This is considerably shorter than the usual duration of crucifixions, which could last up to 3 days. Is it possible that Jesus was removed from the cross while still alive? Moreover, there are historical records suggesting that crucifixion victims were sometimes spared. Josephus, a first-century Jewish historian, specifically tells of a case where 3 of his friends were crucified. He appealed to the Roman authorities, and the men were taken down. One of them actually survived. Could a similar appeal have been made for Jesus? We know from the Gospels that Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the Jewish council, asked Pilate for Jesus' body. Could he have requested earlier removal, potentially saving Jesus' life? And we mustn't forget the strange events reported at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. The Gospels describe an earthquake, darkness covering the land, and the curtain of the temple being torn in two. Could these unusual occurrences have led to an early end to the crucifixion, increasing Jesus' chances of survival? Finally, let's consider the spear wound Jesus supposedly received. John's Gospel says a Roman soldier pierced Jesus' side, and blood and water came out. Some medical experts suggest this could indicate that Jesus was still alive at that time, as the separation of blood and water is a phenomenon that occurs after death. History is full of subtleties and nuances, and while we may never have definitive proof, the historical and medical evidence certainly adds another layer of complexity to the crucifixion story. This evidence paints a very different picture from the traditional narrative. Of course, the swoon theory has its critics. As with any hypothesis that challenges long-standing beliefs, there's a fair share of pushback. Let's look at some of the main counter-arguments and criticisms against the swoon theory. A significant argument against the swoon theory is the assertion that Romans were adept executioners. The crucifixion process was a brutal and efficient method of execution perfected over hundreds of years. Critics argue that it's unlikely that a victim would survive, let alone recover sufficiently to appear alive and well 3 days later. Moreover, the Romans were notorious for their thoroughness. They would not have allowed Jesus to be taken down from the cross if there were any doubt about his death. Another common criticism is the physiological aspect. Jesus was reportedly on the cross for about 6 hours, a duration that, combined with the severe physical trauma, would likely have resulted in death from shock, if not from the crucifixion itself. Furthermore, the spear thrust into his side, described in the Gospel of John, would have caused a fatal wound. Critics argue that even if Jesus had merely swooned, the severity of his injuries would have precluded his survival, let alone his ability to move the heavy stone from his tomb's entrance. The swoon theory also faces criticism from theological perspectives. Many devout Christians argue that the theory undermines the fundamental tenets of Christianity, particularly the resurrection. The resurrection is seen as a miraculous event, a testament to the divine nature of Jesus. To suggest that Jesus merely swooned, critics argue, is to deny his divinity and the miracle of the resurrection. Lastly, critics point to the lack of historical evidence supporting the swoon theory. While the theory is based on interpretation of biblical and non-canonical texts, there is no concrete historical evidence to support the claim that Jesus survived the crucifixion. Critics argue that the absence of such evidence weakens the theory's credibility. So what if Jesus did survive the crucifixion? What are the implications? Now this is where things get intriguing. You see, if the swoon theory holds water, it has the potential to upend our understanding of Christianity and the resurrection. Firstly, the entire premise of Christianity hinges on the belief in the resurrection of Christ. If Jesus did not die on the cross but merely swooned, then the resurrection as we understand it would need to be re-evaluated. It would not be a resurrection from death, but a recovery from near death. Now, this doesn't necessarily negate the miraculous nature of Jesus' survival. After all, surviving the brutal crucifixion process, let alone the subsequent entombment, would be nothing short of extraordinary. But it would shift the narrative from a supernatural resurrection to an incredible survival story. Secondly, the swoon theory would also challenge our understanding of Jesus' nature. The belief in the divine nature of Jesus is central to Christian faith. If Jesus survived the crucifixion, it could be interpreted to mean that he was not divine, but an extraordinary human being. This would ripple across Christianity, questioning the nature of Jesus and his teachings. Thirdly, if Jesus survived, where did he go? Did he live out his days in obscurity? Did he continue his teachings? The answers to these questions could open up a world of possibilities and theories, each with its own implications. Lastly, the swoon theory would also have implications outside of Christianity. It could influence interfaith dialogues and our understanding of religious history. It could also challenge the way we interpret religious texts, encouraging us to question and explore rather than blindly accept. Whether you believe in the swoon theory or not, it undeniably provokes deep thought and questioning. It's a theory that invites us to reflect on our beliefs, the nature of faith, and the incredible story of a man named Jesus. Regardless of where you stand, one thing is certain: it's a discussion worth having. We've journeyed through an intriguing exploration of the swoon theory, the proposition that Jesus Christ did not perish on the cross, but rather survived. This is not a claim we make lightly, but rather with a careful examination of evidence from various sources. We have explored the swoon theory, a hypothesis born out of the 19th century, which suggests that Christ merely lost consciousness on the cross, appearing to be dead, only to later revive within the tomb. It's a theory that profoundly challenges traditional thought, and yet does it not also warrant our attention? From there, we delved into biblical evidence, scrutinizing verses that may hint towards this possibility. Verses that depict Christ's body after crucifixion, his conversation with the thieves on the cross, his sudden death, all potentially pointing towards the swoon theory. Non-canonical scriptures, too, were not ignored. the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, these controversial texts, though not officially recognized, hold narratives that may support the idea of Christ's survival. Historical evidence also played its part in our discussion. The practices of Roman crucifixion, the specifics of Christ's crucifixion, and the medical possibilities of survival. All these factors were considered, providing intriguing insights into the plausibility of the swoon theory. Of course, we also addressed the criticisms and counterarguments. The swoon theory, like any theory, is not without its detractors. There are those who argue that it is implausible, that it contradicts both biblical and historical records. Yet isn't it also important to challenge the status quo, to question what we have been told? Reflecting on the implications, we must consider the profound impact this theory holds. If Jesus did survive the crucifixion, what does it mean for our understanding of history, of faith, of the very foundations of Christianity? What do you think? Did Jesus Christ survive the crucifixion? Let's continue the discussion in the comments below.